So thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to kick things off. I am your host, Patrick McDonough. I just want to go through a couple of things before we get going. First of all, just to introduce Digital Transitions. For those that aren't familiar with DT, we are a leading provider of digitization solutions for the world's top libraries, galleries, archives, museums, corporations, and institutions. From turnkey digitization solutions, advanced imaging systems, and sophisticated software to DT's state-of-the-art Service Bureau division and our unparalleled training, services, and support team, for over 2 decades, DT has been trusted by the most discerning organizations looking to achieve the highest level of imaging fidelity and efficiency, because every detail is worth preserving. With that said, I'd want to introduce a couple of people that are helping us semi behind the scenes. You'll see them in the chat and Q&A, if not on camera. But Todd Schweikert and Astrid J. Smith are both joining us. And some of you might be familiar with Astrid's name. She has joined DT recently, and we're really excited to have her on board as well for many, many reasons. But Todd, some of you may know him as well as one of our sales reps, both very knowledgeable. They're going to be helping out with the live chat and the live Q&A. So if you have any questions, comments, those kind of things, they'll kind of handle that directly. Just to go over that, speaking of the live chat, we do have a live chat for communicating with all of us, fellow peers, audience members. We welcome comments, but as always, please be respectful to everybody. This whole thing is an Ask Me Anything. It's about submitting questions, and hopefully Ben, I'm assuming he knows everything about digitization, so we'll put that to the test today. But the Q&A is a separate function from the chat, so I just want to make sure to point this out. If you don't see the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, check under the little 3 dots more button, and it'll pop up a window. You'll see a Q&A question mark icon there. Click on that. The reason for that is the chat can be kind of busy, and if you put a question in the chat, it tends to scroll off the screen before you have a chance to see it. Whereas if you use the Q&A, then we'll make sure to capture that and hopefully get to it. So with that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Or did I ever start?
I don't think it started. It was there and it went away, but.
All right, well, here we go. So, all right, everybody, let's get going here. I want to welcome Ben Cort. He's longtime DT, head of support, and kind of all around expert in digitization. Ben, if you want to maybe give like a little 2-minute synopsis of your experience and kind of what you do for DT, and then we'll get into answering some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for having me. I'm excited to answer some of the community questions that we got, as well as the questions that folks have for today. I've been in the cultural heritage digitization field for 15 years. Prior to DT, I was the collections photographer at the Portland Art Museum out here in Portland, Oregon. As part of my role there, I was really involved with the community, did a lot of presentations. I was chair of the Digital Imaging Special Interest Group with MCN, the Museum Computer Network Conference. Presented at a couple of those, was a presenter at the last pre-pandemic DT Roundtable, and then joined up with DT in 2021. Have met a number of folks. I haven't looked at who all's in the chat, but have met a good number of folks who are here through my installs and training. My day-to-day at DT is organizing and working with folks on their installation projects, getting gear out to folks, as well as answering tech questions, helping folks work through problems, and helping folks work through workflow questions like we're going to do today. So definitely been a broadening experience. When I came to DT, I was fairly new to the world of sort of the library and archive side of it, with a lot of experience in museums. But it's been a really fun journey the past 5 years, getting to know all of our library and archive clients more so.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ben. Hopefully that sets a stage for what's going to come. You clearly have a lot of experience in this, and not just your own personal experience, but all the DT sort of customers and clients and things you've helped set up in different situations and for different use cases, those kind of things. So we're gonna start with some softball questions here just to get things going before we get into the really deep technical stuff. So just to kick things off, from your perspective, kind of on the front lines, how have the needs of cultural heritage changed over the last decade? Like, and with that in mind, where do you think things are heading? Where do you foresee being important in the next 5 years?
Yeah. So, I think over the past 10 years, the emergence and the adoption of standards has really been the driving force, with the FADGI guidelines coming out in 2016 in their first published iteration and then being revised more recently, along with the ISO standards and the Metamorfoze standards. I think that's really been the focus of a lot of folks for a long time. And I think we're starting to see folks starting to move into more production focus rather than strictly quality. I think we're seeing a lot of people say, all right, I can do, with either, a lot of folks using our equipment are saying, all right, great, I can get really good quality pretty quickly. Now I need to be able to move faster through stuff. And so I feel like we're starting to see a shift from spending a huge amount of time digging into quality to going, oh, quality is kind of a given now. How do I move quicker through my production? And I think that's going to be where things go. I think there's sort of focus on the human operator. How do we maximize the people in our space? How do we ensure that human comfort and sort of ergonomics are being achieved in a big way? Because I think that's going to be the core issue moving forward for the foreseeable future. Is it's going to be, how do we staff these projects? I think that's what we're going to start seeing. So staffing, training, sort of the human focus. I think the quality and the technology is very good. There's things we're doing to make it better, but I think we're going to see people and staff and training be sort of the focus moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually had my next question was going to ask you, have standards become easier or harder to achieve with modern technology? I think obviously you're saying with technology where it's at now, it's much easier to achieve these standards, and the bottleneck becomes efficiency and just kind of throughput for all this stuff. Back it up a little bit, I'm sure a lot of our audience is very familiar with these things, but there might be a few that aren't. So for their sake and mine, honestly, as well, how do you explain imaging standards to non-technical stakeholders? Like, how do you communicate how important these are and the reason for putting the effort or getting the equipment that makes achieving these standards possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So backing it way up, the core question that standards like FADGI and ISO 19264, which is the standard for reflective imaging, effectively the European equivalent of the FADGI guidelines, they seek to quantify the question, what is good, right? If I ask 10 people what good is, I'm going to get 10 different answers. The focus of a standard and a guideline is to quantify that and ensure that we all have a baseline of image quality that we're able to meet. It's in a couple of our courses, and it's a thing that I love showing people, is when you Google Starry Night, you'll get the top 10 results are 10 dramatically different objects. And the idea of standards and guidelines is to eliminate that so that folks that are looking at collections across different organizations are able to make obvious and clear visual distinctions. From a functional standpoint, FADGI being a guideline, it is just that. It's a guideline. It sets forth some parameters and some hopeful topics. The ISO, the International Standards Organization, is a much more rigidly defined version of that. So depending on what your program goals are, you can choose to be FADGI guideline compliant. You can choose to be ISO level A, B, or C compliant. It sort of depends on what your media type is and sort of how you choose to engage with those in the States.
Yeah, I think, I love the Starry Night example because it's such a clear thing. You Google image and you just see this sea of different colors and, contrast and all these things. And I think probably anyone, in the digitization world has dealt with having to redigitize a collection because what they did, 15 years ago or 20 years ago just doesn't hold up. I remember the first digital camera I ever used back in 1996 had a maximum resolution of 640 by 480, and it seemed like magic at the time. So having these standards definitely helps alleviate some of that. I think, one aspect when you talk about standards, the assumption is, get a really good camera or a good target, good lighting. But there's some other considerations there too. And I'm going to go to a question that Elizabeth Bradshaw sent to us. Her specific question is, they have a room that is west facing with single paneled windows, And the question is, besides UV film, what else would help regulate sun, heat, temperature in this room? But I think just more broadly, how can a room setup or ambient lighting and these kind of things impact standards? And what do you look for to help mitigate those things?
I mean, the environment that one is in for digitization has massive ramifications to the point where the FADGI guidelines, being sort of a start to finish way to view a program, specifies paint codes for the walls and the ceiling of your space. So, when I'm going into a space, the things that I immediately will look for is, are there, one, do we have control over the lighting in a space, be that ambient lighting, like our question asker is requesting. The overhead lights. Can we turn the overhead lights in a space off? I've been in spaces where that's not doable, and we're like, okay, I guess we're going to start pulling bulbs out of fixtures and hoping that no one gets mad at us. Ideally having black ceilings where you don't have stuff, that's in the ceiling. I learned recently that you can special order anodized black sprinkler heads. So if you have to have sprinklers in your space, which most of us do, you're able to get them painted black, which is exciting. As far as strategies for light control in a space, because we definitely see a lot of folks in most of these environments, a custom built or even custom retrofitted space is a premium, right? We're moving into X office spaces, repurposed areas of collection area. So being able to be in control of the spaces is challenging at best. So for getting control over a window, I've seen examples as simple as taping black foam core over that window. That's a fun one. That also, if you get creative with a piece of tinfoil, you can turn that black cardboard into a camera obscura and have if you have a nice window, that's always a fun thing to do. Just poke a little pinprick in some tinfoil, put that over your black foam core. Early camera. If it's you have the ability to control it more so, blackout shades like you would find in hotel rooms that are permanently installed. They're like a tracked curtain that lets you raise and lower and it blocks out light. But yeah, anything that you can do in that regard. We've got I've written for DT a space planning guide that goes through some of that stuff. But
yeah.
The more you can control that environment, the better your results are going to be, particularly in a standards focused environment.
Yeah, I want to highlight something you said. So the guide about just setting up the space, you've put that content together. So DT is actually putting that and kind of wrapping up a nice new guide. For those that aren't familiar, DT has a series of digitization guides that kind of address different types of material and different equipment, different workflows. And this one is being worked on right now. So hopefully, I would say in the next month, we should be releasing that. So it'll be nice to have another guide there. And I think answer a lot of those questions about, how to set up your space properly to hit these kind of guidelines.
It should include the Benjamin and Moore paint code for neutral gray, so you don't have to go buy all of the GTI paint.
Yeah, that's nice. That's helpful. It's one of those things that might not think of immediately. Even things like, I've heard stories of somebody, wearing like a pink shirt while they're trying to digitize and noticing that they're not getting the color that they want because it's reflecting on those kind of things.
That's a fun demo to do of you pre-flight with a black shirt and then you take your sweatshirt off and you've got fluorescent highlighter pink shirt on. It looks different.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of moving off that a little bit, I'm seeing some other questions come in live. I want to try to get to some of these. So, you get the technical aspect of like hitting the guidelines solved. You've got the equipment, you've got the space set up. So then it becomes, a matter of kind of the, to your point, the throughput and the ROI on this kind of thing. So if you're a small archive with limited staff, do you think it's worth prioritizing like highly skilled people at a higher cost but lower error rate? Or use like student labor. So it's lower cost, but you're going to have a lot more training. So, let's say you're looking at a 12-month project. How do you prioritize those investments and how do you justify, spending more to get these like preservation grade with the more skilled people?
Yeah, that's such a good question. For me, the places that I see that are having a lot of success with these are there's one person that's very talented. Everyone in this universe is generally fairly talented, so not to say that there's only one that can be doing the work, but having a program leader or someone that understands sort of the longer term vision of the program is really important. And depending on the budget requirements, depending on the length and duration of projects, students can be really, really good folks to utilize. People get a little gun shy about them because there's more turnover. There's sort of the perception. I was a student worker at one point. I know how that goes. But if you've got someone that is, I would say if you only can hire like one or two people, I think getting skilled operators is really, really valuable because you then have that through line on your program and you can start to make the strategic decisions that allow you to employ or leverage student workers, volunteers, that kind of stuff. If you are, not able to lay out workflows, lay out systems that allow you to maximize and start minimizing the error rate that isn't going to just sort of come along with less skilled work, then you're just going to be incurring that. There's not a huge benefit there. So I think,
yeah. I guess let's say obviously everyone would like to have more budget to invest more in the facility, but the reality is sometimes you just can't. And so if you have to use student labor that's less skilled, are there certain minimum sort of skill sets that you would want, like obviously like having a photographic background or art, color, those kind of things? Are there certain skills that you think transfer better if somebody had to step into this and didn't have a lot of experience in digitization?
Digitization, what I find, particularly as someone with a strong photography background, digitization is a very different process to photography. And I find, as students, I think the most important thing, I think, for these programs that we work with and students is can this person show up and be responsible? Can I trust this person to do a good job, to take ownership of the process and not just, get off the rails with me, right?
Not be a typical college student is what you're
exactly
saying.
Right. Like I think that's the biggest thing. Like, can this person follow instructions, be receptive to processes, understand what they are working within, understand the gravity of what they're doing? Because again, if you have someone that's very skilled leading the program and putting together workflow documentation, training documentation, it's less important that they have that photographic background. That certainly is helpful. Yeah. But when the job effectively is get the system set up to be in compliance with whatever your program is requiring, and then cruise through a couple hundred pages of correspondences or a couple volumes of a ledger, being able to light a portrait really, really nicely doesn't play a huge role.
Yeah.
But knowing, hey, I'm working with a really fragile document, I should probably engage my brain and think about what that means. That's going to be more important. So
yeah,
letting someone else that has the MLIS, that has the digitization focus, guide, metadata, guiding all of that, that's going to be more important than like, I got to hire students that know what cameras are. It's like,
yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of like how to prioritize that. I'm going to switch topics here. Anytime we do an event like this, we always get a lot of interest in film and transmissive material. So we got a ton of questions before the event. I have a feeling we'll probably get a few in the Q&A pretty soon. I'm going to try to limit this to about 15 minutes because this could easily, we've literally done 2 entire webinars that were just on film and transmissive material, which you can find on our website right now. They were both an hour long. So we've got 2 hours of material on this already. This could easily overrun the entire event. So I'm going to limit it to the next 15 minutes, hopefully. But I want to run through some of these questions because I think there's a lot of good information here. I'm going to start with sort of a simpler one. what are the different considerations to keep in mind when digitizing glass plates versus film? And any specific advice for digitizing magic lantern slides, which I think is really interesting. Magic lantern is, these have been around since like the 17th century and were like hand painted glass. So I'm really curious about what these slides might be. I think that's a really fascinating collection. But for something like that, like a hand painted glass slide or glass plate negative, something like that, how is that different from traditional film when you're digitizing?
Yeah, that's a fun question for sure. I would say, the biggest thing is going to be just the question about, it's glass now. That means that we are using, glass as a lens. That's what all of our lenses are made out of. So now we've got a piece of debatable quality glass, if it's historic negatives from like the Shackleton expedition. That glass is going to be super thick, super wavy, and that's going to impact the quality of the object if we're imaging through it. Making sure that, a lot of the historic, glass plates are more likely to have, we'll call it metadata for lack of a better word, but inscriptions, writing, labels, notes on them. So understanding what those are, understanding if we need to include, exclude, what to do with those. Also, the glass plate, it might be broken. It might have inclusions on it. If it's, they're almost all done in the field, so there might be random bits and bobs in there. So, trying to understand if the glass plate is an object in and of itself, or if we are only considering the content of that negative, right? With film, generally we're viewing that more as a vessel for the negative object. And with the glass plate or a lantern slide, I find that folks are generally maybe not more concerned, but they're thinking about them as objects with equal prominence to the content of the image. I don't know that I have any specific advice for specifically lantern slides. I think, thinking about them in terms of, again, sort of like that, are we concerned about it as a physical object? Do we want to be working with it? What's the focus of this object? And are there extra things on there that we're concerned with? So.
Yeah, it kind of leads to another topic. I've heard this come up a few times. When you talk about digitizing film or transmission material, like, are you trying to digitize it as an object where you just capture it as it truly is, or do you digitize it with the intent of turning it into a positive, for instance, from a negative, and get like the artist intent behind it versus like capturing it as a historical object? What are your thoughts on that? How do you make that decision?
So for me, it really is going to depend sort of, again, like what is the context of this thing as an object? Is this a wet plate done in the field, or is this a piece of Kodak 200 gold 200 film that we shot back in 1996, right? What is the sort of provenance of the media type? And then I think it really depends on the context of the collection as well. If it's a, Ansel Adam negative, that's going to carry a lot more weight than the archival holdings of the Los Angeles Public Library's documentation photographer when they got a new building. Not to say that photographer is not very talented and skilled. That was a very fun thing to get to see sort of the LAPL negatives of when they're breaking ground. But in that context, likely it's much more that we are interested in the content of that negative, in which case saving things like a archival file that will remain inverted, would remain as the negative appears, rather than inverting that, getting to some kind of color semblance and saving that. That's where I would land there. I think generally, because photographic negatives were never intended to be the end goal of the process, right? It was step one of a chain of things where we would process the negative, we'd print it out, you'd have all of this magical stuff. it makes sense to me that you would be more concerned with modern color negatives as the content of them, not necessarily the intrinsic like film quality.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really good point. I think continuing this thread on just kind of film transmissive, we had, let's see, where is this one? So Sarah Lewis sent in a question. I think that opens up kind of another topic, but her specific question is, why did DT choose to make its film carriers with open space instead of glass that kind of sandwiches it down and keeps the film flat? Film, it's rolled up, it tends to want to curl when you lay it down. But there's other situations where you don't want to kind of squish fragile film down. So talk through that, Ben.
Yeah. So the design principle behind the DT film carrier was holding on to as little of the film as possible, meaning that you would see as much of the film as is able to be seen. It definitely opts for a medium to best case scenario for film, meaning that it's not going to be cupped. It might be like roll film that will be curled up along its long axis is fairly easy to unroll. Cupped film is very challenging. And then that's, I think, where Sarah's question comes in about, the nitrate film not being able to be used in the film carrier.
Yeah.
And I think for that's where getting a little creative, right? We've got the ANR, the anti-Newton's ring carrier, where you can modulate how much sort of squish force you're applying to your film. I think we talked about that in the most recent film scanning webinar where we talk about Z-stacking emulsion lifts. But being able to control that is really important. And I think, when you've got the dual the two problems of I've got curved film, but I'm imaging film at high magnification. Therefore, I have really shallow depth of field. So your plane of focus is really small. We've opted for hoping that the film is receptive to being laid out flat. And if it's not, there might be other considerations that we would need to play with, and that a carrier like the one that I've got on my desk for 120 millimeter might not be appropriate anyway. So sort of providing more options, allowing that sort of adjustment of what we're working with, right? Like, you've got a thicker than average slide. Let's take the spring clips off the carrier to accommodate that. So,
For those that aren't maybe familiar with Z-stacking or focus stacking, give like a brief run through of what that is and why you would use that in this kind of scenario.
Totally. So Z-stack, the idea, going back to initially, it's like we don't need to hire photographers. It's helpful to have one or two. Depth of field is the idea of your acceptable sharpness on a lens is limited. And as we go up in magnification, that amount of depth of field is going to come down to fractions of a millimeter. Z-stacking, where we move the camera on the column or change focus, allows us to get effectively a panoramic stitch of more than one area, but in the same object. So you can imagine a ruler, we would start at the near end, focus at the 1 inch mark, take a capture, focus at the 2 inch mark, take a capture, focus at the 3 inch mark, take a capture. You can use software to blend those all together, and we will now have a larger portion of the ruler in focus than we would have in any other way of doing that. So with film, we talked about that because film that can't be flattened, you will lose an amount of value and information by not Z-stacking it. And so the idea there was we can do this process, get more information out of film that's, half an inch thick or has half an inch of surface deformation rather than these nice laser smooth pieces of film.
Yeah, so you're kind of peaks and valleys. You get the focus of the peak, you get the focus of the valley, kind of combine that, get a nice, everything's in focus.
Exactly.
So I've seen this question a couple of times, but someone's asking, what's the best target to use for digitization with transparent objects like film in slides? Because your transmissive light versus reflective light obviously reacts differently to the target. So what do you do there?
Totally. There are several targets that are commercially available. You have ISA, Image Science Associates, the makers of the ubiquitous object level targets, device level targets, and the FADGI 19264 target. They make a suite of film targets. They've got 35 millimeter, 120 format, and 4x5. DT makes the DT Nexus profiling and validation targets, as well as there's I think it's Color Fast is who made it, but it was the IT8 target. The issue with targets for film really comes down to what are we doing with the target? What's the goal of the target? We've talked about this in our 201 course, choosing color targets and what are we doing with them. Film really lacks a lot of the like capital R right answers that reflective media have. The only real requirements for film are PPI and some sharpness. The ISA targets, as a result, are very good options for confirming compliance with those requirements. There aren't, however, requirements for tonality, for color, for white balance. There's guidelines, there's suggestions for all of those. ISO does not have presently a 19264 equivalent for transmissive media. The Golden Thread software will report hopeful values. So, if we're looking to confirm compliance, the ISA suite of targets is good. They have nice slant edge features. They've got other features on there that can assist you getting into the ballpark. The DT Nexus profiling and validation targets produce really, really, really nice color profiles for transmissive media. They're, to my knowledge, the only target that is hand measured in a meaningful way. The IT8 target, it's a couple hundred values on a 35 millimeter slide. It's really challenging to actually measure those accurately and create a good profile from that. I personally have not had success with them. Other folks I know have. I know we've done some work with National Geographic with their Kodachrome IT8s, and I know that they are possible to get good profiles from. The Nexus profiles, I find the Nexus transmissive profiling target and the Nexus transmissive validation target, it's a mouthful. I really like those targets. They produce really good color profiles, and it starts to get in a good sort of more systematic way of doing color with the system. So long-winded answer to there's 3 targets. I think 2 of them are pretty good. And it just depends on what you're trying to do with that target in your transmissive workflow.
Yeah, definitely a challenge that, hopefully we'll get there in terms of standards. I hear rumors of that being worked on and something coming, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, you mentioned DT Nexus. We'll do a quick little promo of DT stuff here, but we did just finally release the actual version 1.0 of Nexus. Just came out this past month. A lot of really cool features and kind of the toolkit for digitization that's been missing is sort of how I think about it. But it does have a color negative inversion function. Then can you kind of explain what that is and maybe even talk about like hardware kind of combinations with this and what that all does and means just briefly?
Totally, yeah. So as a system and as a process, it uses a spectrally tuned light source to effectively eliminate the inherent color base of modern safety film, right? All modern safety film has this orange base. We use a specially tuned light source to help eliminate that and get sort of back into the correct pipeline for producing good color out of color negatives. In the past, the workflow that we've always advocated for, because it's been the best option that's available to us, has produced good color. And if you are adept at Capture One's color management stuff, you can get pretty good color out of it pretty quickly. The color negative inversion methodology uses, because it has this sort of tuned light source, it allows us to get really good color really quickly and in a rapid and repeatable way. So yeah, that's sort of that. And it also then leverages the color targets that I just mentioned to help further that goal. So yeah,
definitely. If you're doing lots of these kind of captures, it seems like a pretty valuable investment to get that in there. We did have Ben Croonin, hopefully I'm saying your name right, Ben, joining us from Australia. Ask you a question, kind of going back to the I think the Z stacking thing, asking how can I balance lighting from above and below for a single exposure when capturing the detail on the mountain borders? Oh, okay, mountain borders of the film. So we're talking about something else there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so going back a little bit, again, sort of talking a little bit like this is a good question, and I like it. It also talks about sort of going back to the lantern slides and the glass plates where we've got sort of maybe some like labels or markers on there. It's It's tough because when we have the transillumination from underneath, that's such a bright light source compared to everything else. Um, the options really come down to you can dim the light that is underneath, or you can get a really, really, really bright light or multiple bright lights above the light source. Speaking about the DT offerings, the stellar light source and the function within Nexus called sequencer allows some really cool stuff to be done in that vein, where you would have sort of two captures, one for the mount, one for the content of a slide. The DT smart controller allows two-channel adjustment of light, which means you can sort of dim the underlight to match the exposure for the slide film. You can toggle those back and forth rather easily. And then just generally the stellar light as well, super bright underneath. You can adjust, bring the top light closer. Thinking about an atom where you have your two lights, you would move one underneath so you still have one side light. Or adding a third light or a light box into that equation. So you had nice even lighting for the slide mount and still like nice bright underneath lighting. So
Yeah.
It depends on the equipment you've got to like the technical answer for that, but the idea of balancing those two out to get one capture of a slide where the content is still barely visible is a fun thing to work on. I think we might talk about that in I think 3 film webinars ago. We may talk about that use case.
Yeah, we definitely touch on that. And for everyone on here, we will be sharing an email after this this event to everybody with the recording of the event, as well as linking to some other resources and things like blog articles and other webinar videos you can watch with some of this information. Astrid's doing a great job of sharing some of these links in the chat, but we'll make sure to share those with everybody as well. So, well, I'm going to continue with Ben's questions here. Ben Croonan. We're changing topics. I gave a little bit more than 15 minutes to film, so we're going to go on to something else here. And we're going to talk about metadata. So Ben asks, what methods are recommended for embedding descriptive metadata into digitized files efficiently, and at what stage of the workflow is best to do this? This is a really big topic, so I'll just let you chew on that and flow with it.
It's a big topic, and as much as I have a lot of expertise in the photography side of this, the DAM and data management is an area that I'm not as strong on. So I would say my thoughts on metadata, you should embed it as early as you functionally can in the process, because we want to maintain this idea of like single source of truth, right? The point at which you've got multiple files spaced out into your data stream, and you've got a TIFF and a JPEG and a PNG and then a smaller web JPEG. You would love for all of those to come from the same single source of truth that had all of that metadata applied to it. Depending on what your imaging workflow looks like, if you've got a robust DAM system that can make derivatives, that's generally the point at which I like to see folks apply that metadata. So a very common workflow that I will see is using file name of the object to attach to some referenceable media type or metadata field from a DAM system. So commonly, I think folks will use, and at least what I've done in the past when I was at a museum, we would use our accession number, and then that would port into the IPTC title field. And then upon ingest into the DAM, the metadata tool that we were using would go, oh, I have a record that aligns with this IPTC field, and I'm now going to apply all the metadata based on the schema that I've already been told I'm using. We're going to apply all of that to this file, and then we can use that DAM to generate an access TIFF, a website TIFF, a little thumbnail preview for the CMS. And that kept things really, really smooth. It meant that we didn't have really any human data entry. People are exceptional at a lot of things. Typing in several hundred 12-digit numbers accurately as much as possible is not a good way to do things. We are pretty fallible, and if you're doing a lot of that, it gets to be tough. So I would say that would be the next thing, talking about metadata is like, Methods of embedding, I think, is the first part of that question. So we talked about when I want to see it happen, and that's as soon as we can, but the point at which you still have like one file that is in control of all the stuff. So I just see a quick one that pops up. Is there a better option than EXIF tool? I really like EXIF tool, although you should absolutely update it because there was a security vulnerability that was released and patched. So if you use EXIF tool, update it. Hot tip. So methods for embedding descriptive metadata. That's a really tough one because that does answer the sort of core question of how do I eliminate typing a lot in? So the Capture One CH, Capture One Enterprise, and Capture One Studio all have a barcode scanning tool in them. So if there is a way with your data request, if there's a way for you to incorporate a barcode scan into your file naming, that's a really good way to get that data from like a physical other network into a file name. You can do things with Excel spreadsheets where you can port those names over. The other token in Capture One's next capture naming functionality is clipboard contents. This is one of my favorite ones. It will take whatever you have in that computer's clipboard, so your Control C, your Command C, whatever's in there will now be appended to the subsequent capture. So if you have an Excel document with a bunch of file names in it, you can just copy those, take a capture, and that will append that information in there. So thinking about, I don't know your specific workflows, but getting a machine-generated list of file names and then going from that to Capture One is always going to be better than having to hand transcribe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a cool little tip, the clipboard one.
Yeah, the clipboard's fun. Just remember you're using it and don't copy and paste YouTube links and then try to take photos. You'll run afoul of several rules and Capture One on that front.
It sounds like you're speaking from experience there. Something happened?
Capture One has a file character limit for the file name, and if you think you've got something in your clipboard, but it's actually a Google Drive link or something, it will stuff happens. Not so much now, it's better now, but back in the day it had weird problems. So
sticking on metadata, this kind of opens up a whole nother topic, but I just saw this pop up and it was something I was going to talk about in terms of using AI tools in metadata extraction, transcription, object recognition, those kind of things. What is your experience with that? What are things you might want to share about those tools and how they might be applied? I know we've had some, actually at a roundtable last year, we had a couple of speakers that used AI specifically for things like this. But what are your thoughts on that? Where does that become a useful tool?
Yeah, it's tough. I think for file naming and applying metadata, AI is challenging because a lot of times we're working with process collections, meaning they are already set up in a CMS or in some kind of system. And so really we're not trying to apply a huge amount of data into that metadata field. And probably where I think AI becomes more useful is on extraction of visual content, for alternate descriptions, or, Michelle Gallahan had a really good talk about, it was title cards.
Yeah, the index cards.
Hard flat files. I think I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with that. I know from talking to folks in the field, the big nut to crack is alternative description, meaning when you mouse over an object in a web browser, it will tell you what is in that object. And I think on that front, AI has a ways to go, but that is sort of the one thing that everyone's really excited about is like, oh, we can use this tool to get descriptions of these images ready to go. And I don't think we're there yet, but I know what people are excited about.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely check out those roundtable topics for like more of what AI is doing and how folks are trying to be thoughtful about using it. I know there's a lot of moral thinking about what AI should do, can do, is doing. I don't want to say that I'm the end all be all in that conversation, but there's a lot of folks that are thinking about what to do with that right now. So
Nope, you're the expert, Ben. What you say we're writing down as fact, and you're going to take the blame for anything that happens from this. But yeah, on that topic, just went up. Michelle Golahan, she presented at a roundtable. She also was a podcast guest a couple of months ago, and that podcast is up for those that are aware. DT has a podcast dedicated to cultural heritage digitization, and Michelle came on and talked about that. Really, really interesting conversation. And additionally, we have another podcast live recording coming up in August with Sierra Razo from NASCAR Hall of Fame, also using AI to do some really cool stuff in terms of like image recognition, 100,000 NASCAR historical photos, being able to, show me all the pictures with Tide written on the side of the car. Like those kind of things are being done. So she'll be on with us in a couple of months to talk about that more. So if anyone that's interested, definitely worth checking out as well. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to try to get through some of these kind of random things that are popping up. Again, I appreciate everyone that's sending in questions. There's a ton of really great information and things people are asking. I would love to be able to answer all those. Obviously, we're limited out of time. We'll see what we get through, but we do have another event, Ask Me Anything event with Doug Peterson, our DT's head of R&D. We'll be doing another one of these in a couple of months. So if we didn't get to you, please join us again, and please email in those questions. We'll try to get to everyone. But as we kind of get to the end here, I'm just going to throw out some random ones here and let Ben handle that. So what are the
rapid fire style here, Patrick?
Yeah, we'll try to do that.
I'll curtail my long-windedness.
So what are key performance indicators that should be tracked to measure the success and efficiency of a digitization program beyond just object count? Are there things beyond just kind of like speed and throughput that should be used to measure the success of these programs?
Yeah, I think there's probably a handful, obviously throughput, but amount of reshoots, the times that things, if someone's shooting 1,000 captures a day and then is having to redo a couple hundred of them upon revision, like that's not great. Keeping track of object care. I think it's really easy for us to get really focused on getting objects through, and we can lose sight of like, oh, well, we got that book done, but how's that book doing now that we're done with it? I think, the nebulous metric of, are the people that I want to be using this actually using it? That's a tough one, but is this request getting used? And then, there's always the like how many downloads is the thing getting? Like, are we focusing on a collection that people are curious about? And then
I love the one about the how many reshoots, because it doesn't matter if you're really fast if you're just doing a poor job at being fast. I think that's
yeah. Like if you've got your hand in every other shot, like that's kind of like great. You've technically done the KPI, but you've not actually. There's the letter of the rule, and then there's the spirit of the rule, and we want to be in the spirit of these rules.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few questions on Nexus. I'm going to save those for a minute because there's a few kind of grouped around that I think are interesting to get into. I'm going to switch topics here and just another kind of broad topic, but maybe give a brief, just thoughts, opinions, direction on sort of where you see 3D capture and heritage. Every podcast guest we've had so far, when I've asked them what they're excited about in the digitization world, they've all mentioned 3D in some form or another. So thoughts on where that is and where it's headed and how that applies to like heritage digitization.
Totally. So every conference that I've ever been to has had at least one talk on photogrammetry or some variety of 3D something. I'm excited to see it finally getting lightweight enough that you can use a web browser to actually engage with assets. I think for a long time, people have been excited about it. The big marquee institutions have been able to do it. They've been able to do it successfully. But actually engagement with those assets, I think, has been really challenging, right? I think most folks have been to a museum where there's a spinny thing on a screen that you can engage with, or a VR headset that you can sort of walk around a virtual environment. But I think I'm excited for folks to be able to engage with that like in a more personal way. You could scroll through. I think the Mets started doing this where they've got 3D models that are viewable in their online collection, which
Oh,
is
wow.
really exciting. I think that's sort of where this needs to go. Um,
I love that point because that's what digitization is all about. It's about giving access to things that you don't have access to otherwise. We can't all sit there and hold a 600-year-old book and flip through the pages. So digitization unlocks that. And yeah, to your point, if creating a 3D asset, it's great, but if no one can access it or look at it, what's the point? So I think that's really cool. I'm actually really curious about the Mets thing. I'm gonna have to go check that out.
it's I think it was a month or so ago, maybe 2 months. Time. What is time? It's a flat circle. But yeah, they're starting to do that, and that's really exciting. So I think that integration into the online collection and getting those files um, to have standards and guidelines. I know there a lot of folks are working really hard on that. And then I think some of the new developments with Cort Huemiller, for those unfamiliar, he is one of the 3D specialists over at the National Gallery of Art in DC. He did a talk about the Gaussian splat technology, which is a machine vision AI variant on sort of the photogrammetry input. So rather than using point clouds and textures, they use Gaussians, which are these cute little blurs. And then they're splatted, meaning they're sort of smeared out. And it's a really nice way to view 3D information in a really lightweight way. You can real time render these things. They're super speedy. It's a really, I think that's really exciting, and that's one thing I think where AI is jumping in and doing really good work. Um, so
Yeah, I'm super excited about the Gaussian splats. I mean, Ben, you've heard me talk about this before, but it's really
yeah,
mind-blowing for anybody that's not familiar. It's doing some really, really amazing things, and the quality and what you get out of it is sort of next level. And yeah, to your point, being light enough to interact with versus a very dense, geometry point cloud kind of thing is very cool.
and
Um,
leveraging the same capture techniques and inputs as photogrammetry. So yeah, and that's just a different process pipeline. So
yep.
it leverages those data sets that have been created, and now we can sort of start to do this comparative analysis on that process.
Yeah, really, really exciting. I'm expecting that to kind of bleed into the heritage world sooner than later and become, I foresee it being a standard at some point in the future. But so we're down to about 5 minutes now. So I'm going to get to a couple of these. We had a couple of questions about Nexus. One, hey, I can answer this question. Is it only available with Capture One? Is it Lightroom compatible? It is not Lightroom compatible. It is only available with Capture One. Hey, score me for knowing the answer to something in this talk.
Good work.
Yeah, but a couple other questions is about Nexus processing tools. I think somebody asking about cropping, masking, and about AI use in the processing. I think specifically, maybe give a brief description of Nexus has AI crop built into it. It's one of its core features, and I think is a level ahead of anything I've certainly seen. Maybe give a description of that and kind of use case for why Nexus AI crop is such a game changer.
Totally. So in the past, Capture One auto crop and other auto cropping tools have all been, let me find a rectangle that is of different contrast to what I presume the background to be. And with AI crop, we took a different view on that, and we said, let's find an object. Let's try to teach an AI to figure out what the object in the scene is, and then make decisions based off of that. The quick example here is, yes, it's very good at finding postcards, prints, photographs, and drawings on paper. But because it is able to classify what that object is, we can make decisions based off of that. So the Nexus AI crop, and just like the quick TLDR on the way the AI in there works, we trained a model, we put the model in the software. The model does not get smarter based on what you show it. It does not learn or change or grow or improve based on what you're doing. It's not an iterative AI in that way. And it's also not phoning home. It's not, taking your data that you're putting into it and feeding it into the cloud and, that, falling afoul of Google's old rule of don't be evil. We're not taking your material. We would love to have your material, but we want you to consent willingly to that process so that we can work with the AI and make it better.
Yeah.
So within that, the AI crop tool has loose material. It has a 1-up bound mode, a 2-up bound mode. I think we're working on a inset mode, which I'm really excited about. I know there's some folks hopefully in the chat that are excited about that as well. But effectively, we can say, hey, AI crop, this is a book. And we can have it, instead of going like, oh, it's a white rectangle with a trapezoid on one side, which is how autocrop has worked in the past. It goes, oh, a book. And it will identify the page, the spreading out of the pages of the book, and the cover of the book. And we can say crop to the page, crop to the waterfall, crop to the cover, pad around that. So a much more nuanced approach to the cropping problem. And I know with the current release, I've seen a lot of folks be really excited about it. I know it's been a long time coming, but yeah, I think folks are pretty excited. So 90-day free trial. If you want to give it a shot, go for it. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny. From my point of view, in the marketing research I've done, asking questions, what are kind of the biggest friction point, biggest pain when doing these digitization collections, cropping, and just kind of doing that is a big bottleneck and big kind of frustration about how much it slows it down and kind of all kinds of other things. So having an AI that can do it automatically, intelligently is pretty cool. And I think we've had other questions. We just announced the phase 1 DT-IXH 250 megapixel camera, and that's a lot of megapixels. That's a big file. What are the use cases for that many megapixels is kind of some questions we've had. But in an instance like this, we combined with like AI crop, where you can capture, basically a contact sheet of film and have it crop all those at once, and you get enough resolution that you get a usable, asset out of that. Like suddenly that resolution works really well in a situation like that with the AI crop. So I think there's some really cool stuff coming down the pipeline that's exciting. So I think that'll be great to get into more. Last minute of this. Let me see. What's one we can throw into the last minute, Ben? Actually, let me ask you this. Is there anything the audience did not ask you that you would love to just share? Like just general knowledge tips for people. What do you think?
Oh, I think the audience did a good job. I'm sure I have not looked once in the chat. I saw that one EXIF tool question pop up at an opportune moment, so I answered it. But otherwise, I've not stuck my head in yet.
What is the most common mistake you see when people set up a digitization program for the first time?
Oh, I feel like I answered a variant of this in the podcast that I did. I'm going to say people are too anxious with software. They're not. I want people to experiment. I want people to explore more. Tools like Capture One, tools like Nexus, they're super duper robust. The workflow that we're engaging in, so long as your file is nicely exposed and sharp focus, go to town. I think folks, I fall afoul of this. I'm a instruction reader. I like to know how tools are meant to be used. I'm not very good at using them off label, as it were. But I would encourage folks. I think that's the biggest thing that I see when I'm on trainings and working on site with folks. There's a level of unfamiliarity which results in folks sort of not feeling confident maximizing their tools. And so I would say, bringing, a lot of folks in this field are artists. Bring your art from home and see how that works. Play around with it. These are robust tools that respond well to experimentation. And I would say, bring that sense of what am I trying to do? What do I want out of this? Bring that when you can, bring it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to be intimidated when you open up something like Capture One and you see all these buttons and all these things it can do. Even if you're familiar with photo tools, it can still be a little bit intimidating. I think to your point, just don't be so precious about it. Get in there and just see what it does. Be creative, be exploratory, be curious, and just see what happens. Because maybe you take a bad photo. Okay, delete it and move on. See what it does.
Yeah, you can always delete the session file and get all your assets back and start over.
Yeah.
If you get confused, send us an email.
I do think it's fairly common when I talk to people in the digitization world to have an art background. And I think bringing some of that creativity and curiosity and experimentation, that spirit into this world it doesn't have to be so rigid and sort of structured. You can play around and see what it does. I think that's great advice. Well, Ben, I think we're going to wrap things up here, share some final notes. First, I want to thank our audience. We got some great questions before the event. Lots of questions during the event that were great. Honestly, I wish we could have gotten to all of them. We're just limited on time, but we will do more of these. I think this is enough of a response. There's definitely an interest in these kind of events. And so this was the first one for us, kind of an experiment, but we're definitely seeing lots of interest. So we'll do more of these. And for everyone on that has more questions, email them to us, send them in. We'll answer them, in future events. We might even do some blog articles on these where we kind of answer them asynchronously and share those answers to common questions if we're seeing things asked multiple times by multiple people. So yeah, I appreciate everybody that joined us, took part, shared questions, shared thoughts, and be sure to keep sending those in and keep sharing those thoughts. We really, really appreciate that. I definitely want to thank Ben for your expertise, your experience, knowledge, thoughts. Really, really appreciate that. I know you are a very busy person, so I thank you for sitting down for an hour and going through all this stuff with us. Be sure to check out our website for other upcoming events. Just want to mention a few. We have Martina Hoffman from the Swiss National Library, and keeping an eye on the score. I think Switzerland just beat Bosnia-Herzegovina 3-1 the last time I saw that. So she should be happy. But we have a podcast with her on July 2nd. Again, she's with the Swiss National Library. That'll be a really, really interesting conversation. We record the podcast live. You can join. You can participate in the Q&A during that event, and then we'll release the podcast as one of our podcast episodes. We have another podcast episode, like I mentioned, with Sierra Razzo, the curator of collections for the NASCAR Hall of Fame, on August 27th. Our next AMA is currently scheduled for November 19th, and that's with Doug Peterson, DT's head of R&D. I'm sure many, many of you are familiar with Doug and all the amazing things he has done and come up with. So be sure to sign up for that. You can, our website has our events listed on it. You can go there and get the links to sign up for future ones. All our events, they're always free. They're always virtual, so anyone can join. To that point, we have people from Australia and Chile and Hungary and all over the world joining us. So definitely appreciate that.
Costa Rica as well.
Yeah, Costa Rica. We had Puerto Rico. We had Carson City, all over the place. But and then a big thanks to the DT staff that helped out. Astrid and Todd, thank you both. Really, really appreciate doing such a great job of kind of handling the chat and those questions and sharing information there, as well as putting questions and kind of surfacing them for me to throw to Ben's way. But yeah, again, look out for an email with this full recording. If you've registered for the event, you will get that email with the recording, as well as some of the links that were shared here, some other resources and assets that were discussed here, other webinars we've had, links to those. Be sure to whitelist marketing at digitaltransitions.com. That's where these emails will be coming from, so it doesn't end up in your spam. And you can also, on our website, sign up for DT's newsletter. So we have articles and videos and all kinds of fun stuff coming out pretty consistently, weekly basis. If you want more of this type of information, sign up for that. So with that, that wraps up today. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Astrid. Thanks, Todd. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone that joined us. We hope to see you again at the next one.
Take care, everyone.